In the aftermath of the Islamic State, the Iraqi government's response has really to see anyone who's in any way affiliated as tainted. So if you're a male of fighting age, you're suspected automatically of ISIS affiliation. And so they've collected these lists of tens of thousands, perhaps over 100,000 names. Sometimes names are added to the list because of workplace disputes or because of personal disputes or tribal disputes. Almost all of the convictions and death sentences are issued on the basis of confessions, which every suspect says was extracted through torture. And it's visible. The torture is visible on their bodies. They have scars, they have broken bones, and then the prosecutor would stand and say, "Enough evidence, I ask for a guilty verdict." Within 5 minutes of walking into a courtroom, some of the suspects were sentenced to death. Already, thousands of ISIS suspects have been tried in courts and hundreds have been executed, but this is just a small fraction of the people they've actually detained. During the battle for Mosul, a lot of Iraqi security forces were exacting personal vengeance. Some of them had lost family members to the Islamic State. You had scenes, really sort of gruesome scenes, through villages like Kayara, where the Iraqi government and security forces executed captives and then tied them to the back of cars and dragged them through the streets. And you had villagers it's unclear to what extent they were taking vengeance on ISIS and to what extent they were just trying to prove to the soldiers that they weren't affiliated, but they were going through and cheering as the bodies were dragged through, kicking the bodies, children kicking the bodies. There was a man who climbed on top of one of the bodies and was surfing on the corpse. In carrying out vigilante justice, the Iraqi security forces, on many occasions, were consciously mirroring the Islamic State's worst acts. As part of the vengeance-based response, Iraq's state television channel Al-Iraqiyya runs a show called In the Grip of the Law. And the whole premise of the show is to parade convicted terrorists on camera and force them to confess to the things that they had done or that they've been accused of.
إرهابي من عائلة داعشية بامتياز.
And so you'll have scenes where a terrified man is he'll be taken to the side of a car and told, "Okay, show us how you put the detonator in the glove box of the car." And he'd sort of go through the motions as if he had done this. And they'll be harassed by the security services. There'll be times when they'll kneel before a line of armed men and it looks like they're about to be executed themselves. It's very possible that some of these guys did carry out these crimes, but it's really hard to know because the format of the thing really suggests that these interviews are not voluntary and these people are on death row.
تشعر بأطفالك؟ تشعر بيهم؟ نعم تشعر بيهم. كانوا هسه مقابلي.
The host of the show told me that 3 to 4 million people watch every Friday night. It is, in any case, very popular and fueling a lot of the sectarian tensions and outrage that have driven this war in the first place. I left for Iraq in late August. Here we have another blown up, twisted vehicle. Inside these 3 houses, they found 4 bodies today. I really wasn't expecting to see that scale of destruction in Mosul. The battle had ended more than a year earlier. One of the people I met in the old city was looking for things to salvage from his old home. And as we're going up, he points under a basement hole and he's like, "See, there's a dead ISIS fighter in there." And sure enough, there were some feet and you could see the rest. The floor is covered in bits of concrete and rubble, and I knocked over a piece of concrete and underneath it was an IED, improvised explosive device. It was right there. And then I paused and took a closer look at the ground around me. There's detonators. These are detonators, right? There's a bunch of shells. Military boots, detonator cord over there. Last month, a child was blown up, walking in the rubble to get home. This is happening all the time. Let's get out. No, don't touch that. Do not touch that. I spoke to a woman who identified herself as Saleh. ISIS took over her village. Her husband's brothers joined the group, but her husband didn't. She lived under the Islamic State. She didn't trust the Iraqi government, so when ISIS told them to flee to Mosul, they came with ISIS to Mosul, but still had no affiliation with the group, didn't trust them, didn't like them. When they fled the final days of the battle in the old city, she got separated from her husband. On the way, traveling with their children, she was harassed by militia members at the checkpoints. She was told by an Iraqi soldier that he would burn her if the Americans weren't standing behind him. Her husband never showed up at the camp. He was detained because he was suspected of ISIS affiliation, because his brothers had joined the group. So now, all of a sudden, she's sent to a sector of the camp that's filled with ISIS widows. Her children are treated as if their father was an ISIS member, even though he wasn't. One of her children was born under the Islamic State, and they're being isolated and treated as terrorists from birth. By isolating a generation of children, subjecting their mothers in many cases to sexual assault in the camps, or forcing them into prostitution in order to feed their children because otherwise they won't be given food aid. This is creating the conditions for the next conflict. So Iraq is now entering one of the most delicate moments in its history, because to the extent that ISIS did function as a state, it was entirely predatory, but now it lives on as an idea. The Iraqi government essentially has bet on the idea that you can eradicate a group by isolating family members and killing suspected members. It's never worked. It seems impossible that it will work now.